Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Now, being that it's kind of the depths of winter, I thought, we're all kind of looking for those kind of cozy, warm, kind of sweet fragrances perhaps. So I thought, yeah, why not have a look at some Gourmands? So we've got 6 Gourmands today and they cover all budgets. I've got 2 cheapies, 2 kind of mid-price designers and 2 niches. And they come from my collection, which I have to admit, I'm not the massive, like the most massive Gourmand fan you're ever going to meet. So they're kind of very particular type of Gourmand. I tend to go for Gourmands which are sort of almost Gourmand light, where they have Gourmand notes but they have other notes as well. I don't tend to, not too into fragrance which are all kind of, hey, this is just chocolate and more chocolate with a bit of vanilla on top or something like that. I don't really go down that route. I tend to kind of gravitate more towards Gourmands, which I really enjoy, but they have sort of leathers and woods and things like that in them as well. So, that's pretty much, you're going to see that reflected in these choices. So we're going to start with a couple of cheapies first. Now, first up is kind of a classic. It's Rochas Man by Rochas. And I think probably this one doesn't really need the introduction. It was made by Maurice Roussel in 1999. And I think I read on the Rochas website once that this was actually the first masculine gourmand sort of ever made. I don't know the truth to that, to be honest. I also I'd question how masculine it actually is. But there's that bit of information for you there. Now, Maurice Roussel, he's worked for Frederic Malle, and he made he's worked for Guerlain. He made the women's version of L'Instant de Guerlain, which is just pretty interesting. Interestingly, sort of most interestingly with this fragrance is he later went on to work for Bond Number 9, where he made Bond New Harlem, Bond Number 9 New Harlem. And this fragrance often gets compared to New Harlem. New Harlem is kind of, most people say it's got a bit more maple syrup to it, and it's a bit more pancakey, but otherwise they're quite similar. I've never actually smelt New Harlem, so I can't make that comparison today, but that's a bit of information for you there. I mean, the fact that it was made by the same perfumer leads me to believe that it's very likely that that's true, and that New Harlem is probably a tweaked version of this formula with sort of possibly higher quality ingredients, and that would sort of explain the similarities. It's been done plenty of times before. So yeah, that's kind of that. The notes in this one are on the top, lavender and bergamot. In the middle we got jasmine, Virginian cedar, lily of the valley, raspberry and cappuccino, which is kind of the main note supposedly, and it's the reason that I bought this, but I'll come back to that in a minute. And in the base we got sandalwood, patchouli, amber and vanilla. Now, as you say, the main reason I bought this was because of the coffee note. I was interested in, I've been interested in a coffee note, and you'll see a bit more about that later, but I've been interested in a coffee note for a really long time, and I was on kind of a mission to find my perfect coffee for a really long time. And this was one of the ones, being that it was cheap, I thought I'd give it a crack, and it was quite highly rated. So yeah, I thought I'd give it a crack. Now for me, this is very sweet, and actually the coffee note is not very strong. I have to say I was sort of disappointed from a coffee perspective. It is very, very sweet, and it's very sort of burnt sugar sweet. It's a nice smell though. I do like it. I haven't worn it much, but I sort of smell it now. I sort of feeling like perhaps I've neglected it a little bit. But it is very sweet, and I sort of say I like Gourmands, but when I get this sweet, I tend to kind of start sort of shirking back a little bit. It's a little bit, this is very, very, very sweet, so very burnt sugar. The coffee in it is very creamy. It's more of a cappuccino note, and that's what it's listed as, and I'd have to agree. It's very, there's no sort of bitter richness to this in the coffee at all. It's very down in and creamy, and you can sort of subtly pick up a coffee-ish sort of vibe to that cream, and say like a cappuccino or something like a coffee creamer or something like that, where you get those like coffee creams that you add to like milk drinks and things. It's something along those lines. It's not, so I wouldn't really class this as a coffee fragrance, to be honest. Now, interestingly to me, I get a lot of the raspberry, but some people I've heard of really struggle to find that raspberry. But for me, this is actually a lot of cream, a tiny bit of cappuccino, and a lot of raspberry. And I don't get a lot else, to be honest. I say a lot of those, reading those note lists and looking at it now, like lavender and bergamot. The lavender, I suppose it's got that sort of flowery vibe to it. But sort of, jasmine, Virginian cedar, amber, sandalwood, patchouli. I don't really get any of those notes when I wear this. For me, it's mainly like a kind of burnt sugar, sort of very caramelized sugar, and little hint of coffee, but with quite a blast of raspberry, and very, very sweet and sugary. So yeah, that's Rochas Man. It's very cheap, and it's a nice gourmand. I think this one is probably the most gourmand of gourmands in this list. Well, perhaps not, but it's one of. And I do recommend it. I think it's very nice. If you like sweet fragrances, you'll really like it. I think it leans a little feminine, but it's totally unisex in my eyes. So it's called Rochas Man, but I think it's absolutely unisex, and it's a nice fragrance. I'd recommend it. I do think it's good for the price. I think it's really good. Yeah, it's pretty much Rochas Man. Say if you're looking for a coffee fragrance, I would probably not recommend it. But if you're looking just for a gourmand with a coffee kind of edge to it, like that kind of sweet cappuccino, and you don't mind the sound of all the other notes, then yeah, I think it's a nice fragrance. Second cheapie today is going to be Molinard Vanille Patchouli. Now, this one is pretty much what it says. I mean, there is a note list. It came out in 2015, but it's sort of based on a very old patchouli fragrance of Molinard. And Molinard, they're not just the most well-known kind of brand probably to most people. They're a really old French brand from Grasse in France, and they've been around for ages. They made patchoulis in the sort of 60s and 70s that were really popular, and they kind of carry that on with this. And so the note list for this is patchouli, sandalwood, vanilla, benzoin, and musk. Now, again, I would say no. Like, all I get from this is vanilla, benzoin, and patchouli. And that's kind of all I wanted it for me. It's called vanilla patchouli. I didn't really need any of the sandalwoods and things like that. You don't get those, really. What you do get is a very classic, quite medicinal patchouli. It's quite clean. It's not like super dirty. It's very like hippie patchouli. If you don't like that, then I would steer well away. It's very much a hippie patchouli from those kind of 70s kind of head shop vibes. And the vanilla is interested in this one. The vanilla is a very, say it's got benzoin in it as well. And actually, I would say that it's very, benzoin, if you're not familiar, it's like a vanilla, but it's quite thick, and it's dense, a little denser, a little thicker. Whereas vanilla can have that quite, sometimes can have that lightness. Benzoin tends to sort of really be quite resinous and thick, and that really sort of makes this vanilla a little bit like a sort of cooking vanilla almost. It has that kind of slightly boozy, very heavy vibe for a vanilla. For me, it's a little bit on the heavy side, but the dry down is beautiful. Once you kind of, that vanilla calms down a touch, I think this is gorgeous, and the patchouli is magnificent. The sad part for me is I bought this mainly for the patchouli, and when you spray it, you get big blast of vanilla and patchouli, and they're blended so well that it's actually quite difficult to sort of feel like where the patchouli finishes and the vanilla starts, or you know, like where one starts and the other one where one stops and the other one starts. It's quite that they sort of mix together really very well, and they sort of you get this constant sort of flow of the two sort of meshing together, and it's really nice. Unfortunately, the patchouli sort of falls back a little over time, and after about an hour or two, you're not going to get much patchouli in this. You get a touch. I think if people are sensitive to patchouli, they'll notice it, but as a main note, it definitely falls back, and you mostly have by that point like a quite nice, warm, rich vanilla as kind of first and forefront, with a touch of patchouli just sitting in the back. So yeah, that's basically vanille patchouli. It's a really nice fragrance. Again, it's cheap. For 100ml, I think it's less than £25. I don't know about dollars, but it won't be expensive. And yeah, the bottle's great as well, which is nice. In terms of the quality of this, I will say the quality of the ingredients are really high. It smells very, the vanilla's very natural. It's not synthetic smelling overly at all. And it's with the benzoin that kind of does tend to turn it almost a little bit synthetic with that kind of cooking sort of vanilla vibe. But the patchouli is gorgeous, and if there's people who like patchouli in particular, I would recommend this. And I would also recommend they do one without the vanilla, and it's just called literally just straight patchouli. And that, I mean, if you're really into patchouli, that's all it is. It's just straight patchouli. It has a bunch of other notes, but to be honest, you'd be hard pressed finding them. It's just a really strong patchouli. It's lovely. But yeah, if you're sort of more, you like patchouli, but you would prefer to mix it with the vanilla, then go for this one. If you want straight patchouli, go straight for the patchouli. They also make another one called like Lay Exclusive or something, Vanille, and that's a vanilla patchouli as well. I haven't smelt that, but apparently it's actually not quite as nice as this one. But I can't pass judgment on that. But yeah, that's a nice cheap Gourmand. It's unusual and it's quite interesting. I would say, you know, as a kind of cheapie, it's borderline like, you know, high quality niche ingredients in this, and I think it's an interesting fragrance as well. So yeah, it's definitely worth checking out if you like the notes. If you don't like the notes, just write it off. It's not worth it. But if you like vanilla and you like patchouli, definitely worth a crack, definitely worth a look. You're not going to smell like anyone else, which is really nice.